Hi guys, welcome to this channel. Please invite your friends to have some fun. Today's episode is about narrative text. Episode 6, Narrative Text, Fairy Tale. Talking about narrative text, you need to focus on the plot, setting, and characters. Narrative text includes fairy tale, folk tale, or folklore, legend, myth, and fable. The plot, the events that take place in the story as an interrelated sequence. Characters. Detailed description of the main persons or people in the story. Setting. The location or surroundings where the events take place. Narrative text. Social function. A narrative text tells a story from a particular point of view that can be presented using words, images, and sounds. The functional objective to narrate events, entertain or amuse and engage the readers in an imaginative experience. Generic structure, orientation, complication, resolution. The orientation sets the scene, mood, and the characters, including when, who, and what the story is going to be about. Complication is when the problems in the story developed. Resolution is the part of the story in which the action falls or the complication is resolved. It is when the characters are able to solve their problems. Tense. The use of past tense because narrative text tells stories that happened in the past. Guys, let me read an example of narrative text for you. Little Red Riding Hood by Len Guanter. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived in a village near the forest. Whenever she went out, the little girl wore a red riding cloth, so everyone in the village called her Little Red Riding Hood. One morning, Little Red Riding Hood asked her mother if she could go to visit her grandmother, as it had been a while since they had seen each other. "That's a good idea," her mother said. So they packed a nice basket for Little Red Riding Hood to take to her grandmother. When the basket was ready, the little girl put on her red cloak and kissed her mother goodbye. "Remember, go straight to the grandma's house," her mother cautioned. "Don't dawdle along the way and please don't talk to strangers. The woods are dangerous." "Don't worry, Mommy," said Little Red Riding Hood. "I'll be careful." But when Little Red Riding Hood noticed some lovely flowers in the woods, she forgot her promise to her mother. She picked a few, watched the butterflies flit about for a while, listened to the frogs croaking, and then picked a few more. Little Red Riding Hood was enjoying the warm summer day so much that she didn't notice a dark shadow approaching out of the forest behind her. Suddenly, the wolf appeared beside her. "What are you doing out here, little girl?" the wolf asked in a voice as friendly as he could muster. "I'm on my way to see my grandma who lives through the forest near the brook," Little Red Riding Hood replied. Then she realized how late she was and quickly excused herself, rushing down the path to her grandmother's house. The wolf, in meantime, took a shortcut. The wolf, a little out of breath from running, arrived at Grandma's and knocked lightly at the door. "Oh, thank goodness, dear. Come in, come in. I was worried sick that something had happened to you in the forest," said Grandma, thinking that the knock was her granddaughter. The wolf let himself in. Poor Granny did not have time to say another word before the wolf gobbled her up. The wolf let out a satisfied burp and then poked through Granny's wardrobe to find a nightgown that he liked. He added a frilly sleeping cap and, for good measure, dabbed some of Granny's perfume behind his pointed ears. A few minutes later, Red Riding Hood knocked on the door. The wolf jumped into bed and pulled the covers to cover his nose. Who is it? He called in a crackly voice. It's me, little Red Riding Hood. Oh, how lovely. Do come in, my dear, croaked the wolf. When little Red Riding Hood entered the little cottage, she could scarcely recognize her grandmother. Grandmother, your voice sounds so odd. Is something the matter? She asked. Oh, I just have a touch of cold, squeaked the wolf, adding a cough at the end to prove the point. But, grandmother, what big ears you have, said little Red Riding Hood as she edged closer to the bed. The better to hear you with, my dear, replied the wolf. But, grandmother, what big eyes you have, said little Red Riding Hood. The better to see you with, my dear, replied the wolf. But, grandmother, what big teeth you have, said little Red Riding Hood, her voice quivering slightly. The better to eat you with, my dear, roared the wolf, and he leapt out of the bed and began to chase the little girl. Almost too late, little Red Riding Hood realized that the person in the bed was not her grandmother, but a hungry wolf. She ran across the room and through the door, shouting, Help! Wolf! As loudly as she could. A woodsman who was chopping logs nearby heard her cry and ran towards the cottage as fast as he could. He grabbed the wolf and made him spit out the poor grandmother, who was a bit frazzled by the whole experience, but still in one piece. Oh, Grandma, I was so scared, sobbed little Red Riding Hood. I'll never speak to strangers or dawdle in the forest again. There, dear child, you have learned an important lesson. Thank goodness you shouted loud enough for this kind woodsman to hear you. The woodsman knocked out the wolf and carried him deep in the forest where he wouldn't bother people any longer. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother had a nice lunch and a long chat. Guys, let's discuss this fairy tale. The plot. The events that takes place in the story as an interrelated sequence. We know from the story that we have a village and a forest. Characters. Detailed description of the main person or people in the story. Little girl, we have little girl live in a village near the forest. Little girl wore red riding cloth. Everyone in the village called her Little Red Riding Hood. Setting. The location or surroundings where the events take place. Dangerous woods, warm summer, brook, and so on. You can find more information. Social function. The functional objective is to entertain or amuse and engage the readers in an imagination experience. You might find this fairy tale entertaining and you might involve your imagination while reading this story. Generic structure. Orientation sets the scene, mood, and the characters, including when, who, and what the story is going to be about. Based on the story from in the beginning of the paragraph, once upon a time, and so on, this indicating the orientation. Complication is when the problems in the story develop. When you see the story, you read the story once again later, the better tweet you, my dear, roared the wolf, and he leapt out the bed and began to chase the little girl. This starts the problem or the issue or the climax or the problems. Resolution, how it is solved, the issue. Okay. When the woodsman nearby heard her cry and ran towards the cottage as fast as he could, and then he helped the girl. Reorientation, the conclusion at the end of the story. You have learned an important lesson. You can see it. I'll never speak to stranger or dawdled in the forest again. This is the lesson that the girl get from the experience. Tense, narrative text. tells stories that happened in the past. Some from the stories, some verbs I found here, I put it here. Went out, wore, called, knocked, ran, the blue color. Uh, these are past verb. Okay. Now, guys, it is time for you to write your own fiction story, or at least read a narrative text. Pay attention to the past tense, plot, characters, setting, and generic structure. You might also find a conclusion or a lesson at the end of the story. Good luck, guys. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next episode. Take care. Bye bye.